And we now take an abrupt about face here. Multiple cases of Nazi flags in Florida have been reported in recent months. We go back to February, for example, where Governor DeSantis faced some stark criticism for not condemning one certain display. Then in May again, outside Disney World, of all things, there was a group that decided to post up at the entrance there, threatening people, waving Nazi insignias and flags. And now a Holocaust center in Florida and others are condemning the presence of protesters holding Nazi flags and posters with anti-Semitic imagery. You can see some of the latest right there outside the Tampa Convention Center for a group called Turning Point USA. They're some young conservative activists. Now, the Florida Holocaust Museum chairman said that demonstration represented a quote-unquote direct threat, now, as he put it, to the Jewish community in that area. So not in no small terms now that's being discussed in Florida. We're joined in the studio by Arsen Ostrovsky, attorney and CEO of the International Legal Forum. Arsen, we bring you in on these types of topics internationally here. I know you've got your attention on them here. How big of an issue, let's just say, start with this, are neo-Nazis demonstrating in public in the U.S. at this point? I know this is not a new phenomenon, of course, but where do you grade this danger at this point?
It's certainly not a new phenomenon, but it's a resurging phenomenon, and it is something that is very, very disturbing. I mean, to see the Nazi flag, the swastika, not only the swastika, but even the SS flag, which is the very entity that was responsible for carrying out the Holocaust, the systematic genocide of the Jewish people. It's not only jarring, it's sickening, and it is completely inexcusable. To see this not only in America today, but anywhere in the world is just something that's jarring and something that we really do need to act, and we need to act fast.
And in terms of looking at the political echelon here, as I mentioned some of the flack that had come to Governor DeSantis, where does, I know the white supremacy, the neo-Nazi movement has had their foothold in U.S. politics, again, come and go for many years. Are you concerned by what you're seeing in terms of political support from these groups or the candidates they may be backing? You mentioned a resurgence. Are we seeing that, this sort of return of this white supremacist political politicians as well?
I think we're seeing really an explosive surge in anti-Semitism as a whole. Yeah. We're seeing it certainly on the far right, the neo-Nazis, as we've seen in Florida. We're also seeing it on the far left, as we saw in Boston just recently, the Boston BDS mapping project, which did exactly the same thing, but from a different perspective by singling out and identifying Jews or Jewish organizations. Both of them blame Jews for all the ills. The ones marching in Florida were blaming Jews for everything to do with abortion. The ones in the Boston BDS mapping project are blaming Jews for all the racism and all the ills. So really, Jews today are taking it from every which side, and it's important for those that really do stand up against racial hatred, against intolerance, and against antisemitism to condemn it irrespective of which side and where it's coming from.
Is there something unique in Florida? I mean, just to look at the state there, there's a relatively high number of Jewish residents of Florida. Is that potentially what's drawing them to the streets there to be a bit more threatening? Do we have any idea why Florida in some of these cases?
I'm not sure why it's uniquely Florida. I mean, we've seen anti-Semitic incidents across the United States at record highs. In Florida in the last year, it's gone up, I think, almost 50%. I'm not sure why Florida is so unique. Perhaps it is because of the large Jewish community, but certainly Florida is not unique when it comes to anti-Semitism in America.
And not the hotbed either, we should mention here. But I understand there's some Nazi memorabilia that's coming up in auctions all around the world. We're seeing a bit of a, I don't even know what the right word is, resurgence of this type of stuff appearing in auctions. What does that say about the demand, or that the fact that that demand is still there? What's your perspective on that sort of worldwide fascination, demand for Nazi things at this point?
I think it's a sickness.
Yeah.
I don't see how any rational human being would want to have any kind of Nazi memorabilia, knowing what it stands for, knowing the hatred, the violence, knowing everything that they stood for. It's inexplicable to me how anyone would want to collect items like this. The only purpose which I could conceivably think of is to actually collect them in order to actually destroy them. But it's mind-boggling that there are people that do want to collect them, and I think we need to put more emphasis on those mediums and those agencies that are actually selling these kinds of items, and whether steps can be taken in order to prevent that from being on the market.
You mentioned, no one who understands, what this is about, what they stood for, what they did would buy into this type of thing. Is there a danger that perhaps that understanding is fading in this new generation in the 21st century, that the true grasp or understanding of the evil behind that is fading somewhat, that there's a different association coming up with simply a power from a past era, or that there's a twisted narrative coming around Nazism? We see it happening in Eastern Europe right now with Ukraine and Russia, everyone calling each other Nazis.
It's a mix of all the above, quite frankly. You're seeing there are those people who are waving the Nazi flags. They know very well what it stands for, and that there is no excusing, no forgiving them. Then there are those that perhaps maybe younger, who just perhaps not out of any ill will or malice, just are naive, maybe don't know the history. So we have to ask: are we failing somewhere? Are we failing in the education? Are we failing in teaching the youth about not only the dangers of the Holocaust, of racial intolerance and racism? We need to ask these questions, sort of where we're going wrong and what needs to be done.
Certainly in the U.S., we hope and expect, I would say, for these types of displays to be more forcefully condemned or roundly condemned at this point. Well,
I think in this particular case, certainly in the Florida example, it was very roundly condemned, and likewise in the Boston Mapping Project from both sides of the political aisle, which is important. It shows you when it does cross all red lines, then there is that condemnation from both sides, and that's important to
at least that for now. Arsen, thanks for being with us as always, joining us on the program.